A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headache.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine a world where every single letter you type on your phone, every character in this script, and every sign you see on the street traces back to a 3,300-year-old maritime empire. We aren't talking about the Romans or the Greeks, at least not at the root. We're talking about a group of sailors and merchants who basically engineered the blueprint for modern literacy.
It is one of the most successful technological exports in human history, Corn. My name is Herman Poppleberry, and today's prompt from Daniel is about the ancient Phoenicians and their linguistic connection to ancient Hebrew. It's a fascinating look at how trade and linguistics intersect to create the world we live in today. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash.
It's interesting that Daniel sent this over because we usually think of the Phoenicians as just those purple dye guys, or the people who gave the Romans a hard time during the Punic Wars. But the linguistic side, the idea that Phoenician and Hebrew are essentially sister dialects, that changes how you look at the entire Levant.
It really does. To understand the Phoenicians, you have to realize they didn't really call themselves Phoenicians. That's a Greek label. Phoenix means purple people, which refers to the murex snail dye they produced in Tyre. They called themselves Canaanites. They were the coastal seafaring branch of the broader Canaanite culture.
So, while the Israelites were developing their culture in the highlands, the Phoenicians were the late Canaanites holding down the coast in what we now call Lebanon and northern Israel.
That's the geographical split. You have this confederation of city-states, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, that never really formed a land-based empire like the Assyrians or Egyptians. Instead, they built a maritime empire. They were the premier venture capitalists of the Iron Age. If you wanted cedar wood from Lebanon, fine linen, or high-end metalwork, you went to the Phoenicians.
And if you're doing that much business across the Mediterranean, you need a way to keep track of the receipts. You can't be lugging around massive stone tablets with Egyptian hieroglyphics or complex Mesopotamian cuneiform if you're trying to close a deal on a dock in Carthage.
You've hit on the exact pressure point that created the alphabet. Cuneiform and hieroglyphics are logographic or syllabic systems. They have hundreds, sometimes thousands of symbols. It takes years of scribal training to master them. The Phoenicians needed something modular, fast, and scalable. Around 1050 BCE, they refined what we call the Phoenician alphabet, 22 letters, all consonants, no vowels. Those were inferred by the speaker.
It's essentially the first light version of a language. It's the SAS model of communication. You strip away the bloat so the system can run on any hardware, or in this case, any papyrus or potsherd. But how close was this Canaanite language of theirs to the Hebrew being spoken just a few miles inland?
This is where it gets technically impressive. Linguistically, Phoenician and Hebrew are part of the Northwest Semitic family, specifically the Canaanite branch. Most scholars don't even view them as separate languages in the early stages. They view them as a dialect continuum. Think of the difference between someone speaking deep Scots English and someone from East Texas. The accent and some vocabulary are different, but the underlying operating system is identical.
So, if a merchant from Tyre walked into a market in Jerusalem in the year 900 BCE, he's not reaching for a translator app. He's just speaking a bit slower.
He's doing more than that. He's probably just talking. They shared the same triliteral root system, which is the backbone of all Semitic languages. Take the word for king. In Hebrew, it's melech. In Phoenician, it's melech. House is beit or bet in both. Son is ben in both. The core vocabulary for family, trade, and basic survival was virtually interchangeable.
That makes the biblical accounts of King Solomon and King Hiram of Tyre way more plausible. They weren't just political allies. They were literally speaking the same tongue while they were planning the construction of the first temple. It wasn't a lost in translation situation.
It was a collaborative engineering project. Hiram provided the architects and the famous cedars of Lebanon, and Solomon provided the agricultural exports. But the real, aha, moment for me is the script. For centuries, ancient Hebrew was written in what we call Paleo-Hebrew. If you look at an inscription in Paleo-Hebrew and one in Phoenician from the same era, you'd have a hard time telling them apart. The square Hebrew letters we see today on a Torah scroll, the Ashuri script that came much later from Aramaic influence during the Babylonian exile.
So the original look of Hebrew was actually Phoenician. That's like finding out your family's traditional handwriting was actually borrowed from the neighbors because they had a better pen.
It's more like the neighbors invented the pen and everyone realized it was the most efficient way to write. The Phoenician script was a breakthrough because of its phonetic nature. Each sign represents one sound. It democratized literacy. You didn't need to be a high-ranking priest or a professional scribe to learn 22 symbols.
I want to dig into the technical trade-offs of this system. If you move from a logographic system like Egyptian, where a picture might represent a whole concept, to a phonetic system, you lose some nuance, right? But you gain speed. Is that why the Phoenician model won out?
Speed and portability. If you're a trader in a colony like Carthage, you're interacting with Greeks, Etruscans, and North Africans. A phonetic alphabet is platform agnostic. The Greeks looked at the Phoenician system and said, "This is brilliant, but we need symbols for our vowels." So they took Phoenician letters that represented sounds the Greeks didn't have, like the aleph or the he, and repurposed them as vowels.
So alpha is just a Greek guy mispronouncing aleph, which was originally a Phoenician symbol for an ox.
Well, not exactly. Yes, that is the lineage. Aleph means ox. Bet means house. Gimel means camel. You can see the physical world of these people in the very letters we use. The letter O is ayin, which means eye. Our M comes from mem, meaning water, and it originally looked like a wavy line.
It's a literal map of their environment that we're still using to send emails in 2026. But let's go back to the Hebrew connection. If the languages were so similar, why did they eventually diverge? Or did they?
They diverged because of social and political isolation. Languages are like biological species. If you separate them by a mountain range or a different religious structure, they start to drift. Phoenicians stayed very conservative. They kept older Semitic forms like the first-person pronoun anoki for I. Hebrew, on the other hand, started developing distinct features like the definite article ha.
Ha, Eretz, versus just Eretz.
Right. And while the Phoenicians were looking outward toward the sea in their colonies, the Israelites were focusing inward on their unique monotheistic religious identity. Language became a border. Even though they could understand each other, the way they used the language started to signal who they were. It's like how American English and British English are diverging. We use different slang, different spellings, and eventually, if we were separated for 1,000 years, we'd have two different languages.
It's wild to think that the Phoenician language survived in North Africa as Punic, long after the Phoenician homeland was swallowed up by the Persians and then Alexander the Great. I read that even in the 4th century CE, Saint E. Augustine mentioned that people in North Africa were still using Canaanite words that a Hebrew speaker would recognize. That's a nearly 1,500-year run for a sister dialect.
It's a testament to the robustness of the linguistic architecture they built. Even when Carthage was destroyed by Rome, the language persisted in the rural areas. There's a famous case study involving the Kidion inscription found in Cyprus. It's a Phoenician text, but linguists use it to help fill in the gaps of biblical Hebrew because the grammar is so complementary. They use each other to solve their own puzzles.
It's like having two copies of a corrupted file, and you use the healthy sectors of one to repair the other. But what about the religious friction? The Hebrew prophets were constantly yelling about Baal and Astarte. Those are Phoenician deities, right?
Yes, Baal was the storm god of the Canaanite pantheon. The word Baal itself just means lord or master in both languages. This is where the linguistic closeness gets awkward. When a Phoenician said Baal, he was talking about a specific deity. When a Hebrew speaker used the word Baal, it could just mean husband or owner. You can see how that would lead to some massive cultural misunderstandings and theological wars of words.
No, no, I'm not worshipping your God. I'm just telling my husband to pass the salt.
It actually led to some interesting linguistic shifts in the Bible. In some cases, the biblical writers would replace the word Baal in people's names with Bosheth, which means shame, just to avoid the association with the Phoenician deity. It's a form of linguistic search and replace to maintain religious purity.
That's fascinating. It's a conscious effort to break the linguistic link because the cultural link was too close for comfort. Let's talk about the Tel Dan stela. That's a major piece of evidence here, right? It's a stone slab found in northern Israel, written in the 9th century BCE.
The Tel Dan stele is a heavy hitter in archaeology. It's written in an Aramaic dialect, but it uses the Phoenician-style script. It contains the first historical reference outside the Bible to the house of David. The fact that this monumental inscription found in an Israelite context is using a script that is functionally Phoenician shows that the technology of the alphabet was the standard across the entire region. It didn't belong to just one people, it was the shared infrastructure of the Levant.
It's like how every computer today uses the QWERTY keyboard layout. It doesn't matter if you're writing in English, French, or German. The interface is the same. The Phoenicians provided the interface.
That's a great way to put it. And because they were so good at trade, they exported that interface to everyone they met. The Greeks took it, the Etruscans took it from the Greeks, and the Romans took it from the Etruscans. That's how we get the Latin alphabet. So, when you're looking at the letter A, you're looking at a rotated Phoenician aleph, which was an ox head. When you look at B, you're looking at a bet, which was the floor plan of a house.
I love the idea of the floor plan of a house being our letter B. It makes the alphabet feel less like an abstract set of sounds and more like a collection of tiny ancient icons. It's an emoji system that evolved into a phonetic one.
It actually started as a rebus. You draw a picture of a house, bet, and instead of it meaning house, you'd just use the first sound, B. That's the acrophonic principle. It's the breakthrough that allowed people to stop drawing thousands of pictures and start recording the actual sounds of human speech.
So, looking back at Daniel's prompt, the answer to how closely related were they is basically as close as you can get without being the same person.
Precisely well. I shouldn't say that word. You're right. They were essentially the same linguistic stock. The divergence was more about coastal versus inland and mercantile versus agrarian religious. If you want a modern comparison, think about West German and East German during the Cold War. Same language, but 40 years of different political systems, different slang, and different outside influences started to create a noticeable gap. Now imagine that gap over 1,000 years.
But with the Phoenicians, they had the added benefit of being the world's first tech bros. They had the hottest new product, the alphabet, and they were licensing it to everyone.
And they were doing it while producing the most expensive luxury goods in the world. The Tyrian purple was so valuable that it became the color of royalty for 2 millennia. It took 10,000 snails to make 1 gram of dye. So the Phoenicians were the high-end culture of the time. They were the ones the Greeks looked up to for technical knowledge.
It's funny because we often think of the Greeks as the foundation of Western civilization, but the Greeks themselves were very open about the fact that they got their letters from Cadmus, a Phoenician prince. They called their letters Phoenicia grammata, Phoenician marks.
They didn't hide it. They knew they were standing on the shoulders of these Canaanite giants. And for the Israelites, the relationship was even more intimate. They were neighbors who could actually talk to each other. They shared the same poetic structures, the same metaphors. If you read Phoenician inscriptions like the sarcophagus of Ahiram, the phrasing sounds hauntingly like the Psalms. May his judicial staff be broken, may his royal throne be overturned. That's pure biblical imagery.
It makes me wonder what was lost when Phoenician finally went extinct. Because Hebrew obviously had this incredible afterlife as a liturgical language, and then its modern revival. But Phoenician just vanished.
It merged into the cultures that conquered it. In the east, it was replaced by Aramaic, which became the lingua franca of the Persian Empire. In the west, Punic was eventually erased by Latin. But it's not really gone. Every time you write a sentence, you're using a modified version of their invention. It's probably the most successful ghost language in history.
It's a silent partner in every conversation we have. What I find wild is the Punic side of it. Carthage was this massive superpower. Hannibal was a Punic speaker. When he was crossing the Alps to fight Rome, he was essentially speaking a version of Hebrew.
That is a mind-bending thought, isn't it? Hannibal and his generals were using a language that King David would have largely understood. If you took a Carthaginian soldier and dropped him in 10th century BCE Jerusalem, he'd probably be able to order a meal and find a place to stay without much trouble. The Punic speakers in North Africa were the last torchbearers of that ancient Canaanite culture.
And then the Romans did what Romans do. They salted the earth and made sure the Latin language took over. But even the Romans couldn't get rid of the alphabet. They just rebranded it.
You can't kill a better technology. Once the alphabet was out of the bag, there was no going back to hieroglyphics. It was too efficient. It's like trying to get people to go back to using a rotary phone after they've had a smartphone.
So, for the listeners who want to see this for themselves, what's the best way to view the Phoenician-Hebrew connection?
Go look up a picture of the Gezer calendar. It's one of the oldest Hebrew inscriptions, dating to the 10th century BCE. It's a small limestone tablet that lists agricultural months. If you look at the script and then you look at a Phoenician inscription from Byblos from the same time, you will see they are identical. Then try to find a Paleo-Hebrew chart that compares it to modern square Hebrew. You'll see that modern Hebrew looks foreign to the ancient script, whereas Phoenician looks like the true ancestor.
It's like looking at a photo of your great-grandfather and realizing you have his nose, even if you've changed your hairstyle.
I think the practical takeaway here is that language isn't just a way to talk, it's an artifact of trade and survival. The Phoenicians didn't invent the alphabet because they were poets. They invented it because they were accountants and sailors who needed to move information across oceans. They engineered a system that was robust enough to survive the collapse of their own civilization.
That's a powerful lesson for modern tech, too. If you build something that's actually useful and modular, it outlives the company that made it. The Phoenician startup failed after a few centuries of Greek and Roman hostile takeovers, but their core product is still the industry standard 3,000 years later.
It's the ultimate open source success story. They didn't copyright it, they just used it. And because they used it everywhere, everyone else had to learn it to do business with them. By the time the Phoenician city-states were gone, the alphabet was already the OS of the Mediterranean.
What's the most surprising shared word for you? Between the two?
For me, it's the word for gold. In standard Hebrew, it's zahav. But in Phoenician and in some of the more archaic poetic parts of the Hebrew Bible, it's harutz. Seeing that specific, rare word show up in both places is like finding a specific code snippet that proves two different programs were written by the same developer.
Harutz. It sounds like something that's been mined from the earth. It has that grit to it. So, we've got a seafaring empire that called themselves Canaanites, spoke a sister dialect to Hebrew, and essentially hacked the writing system of the ancient world to make it faster and better.
And in doing so, they created the conditions for the spread of ideas that defined Western history. Without the Phoenician alphabet, would the Greek philosophers have been able to record their thoughts as easily? Would the Hebrew Bible have been compiled and preserved in the same way? The tech of the script allowed the content of the culture to survive.
It's the medium and the message. The Phoenicians provided the medium, and the Israelites and Greeks provided much of the message that we still grapple with today. It's a perfect collaboration, even if it wasn't always a friendly one.
It's also a reminder that the borders we draw on maps, this is Phoenicia, this is Israel, were much more porous than we think. People were moving, trading, marrying, and talking. The linguistic evidence shows a region that was deeply interconnected.
I think that's a great place to pivot to the broader implications. If we look at how AI and computational linguistics are handling these ancient languages now, we're seeing even more connections. We're using LLMs, like the ones powering us right now, to find patterns in fragmented inscriptions that humans might have missed for decades.
We're essentially reverse engineering the dialect continuum. By feeding thousands of Northwest Semitic inscriptions into models, we can start to see exactly where a Tyrian accent turns into a Galilean. 1. It's like we're finally getting the high-resolution map of the ancient Levant that we've always wanted.
We're basically defragging the history of the alphabet.
I love that. And for anyone listening who's into language learning, if you study biblical Hebrew, you are basically 80% of the way to reading Phoenician. You just have to learn a different font, the Paleo Hebrew script, and you can suddenly read the inscriptions of the greatest sailors the world has ever known.
That's a pretty cool party trick. Oh, this? It's just a 3,000-year-old receipt for some purple cloth. No big deal.
It really makes the ancient world feel less like a myth and more like a real place with real people trying to solve real problems. Problems like, how do I make sure this guy in Cyprus pays me for this cedar wood?
I'll write it down in this new 22-letter code I just came up with. He'll definitely understand it. And he did. And we still do.
To wrap it up, the Phoenicians weren't just a footnote in history, they were the architects of the information age before it was even a thing. Their linguistic DNA is inside every word we're saying right now.
It's a good reminder to look at the boring stuff, like the alphabet or accounting methods, because that's often where the real revolutions happen. The kings and battles get the headlines, but the merchants and their letters change the world.
And thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It's always a treat to dive into the nuts and bolts of how we got here.
This has been a deep dive into the purple people and their alphabet. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners and keeps the alphabet spreading.
Big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. It's the modern version of the Phoenician trade routes, keeping the data moving.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping us on track. This has been My Weird Prompts.
We'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious. Don't let your alepphs get rotated. Goodbye. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and